In fact, there's another area that I find it's like, here's the thing, right? When you're in a scenario like this, everyone knows that like classic saying, like, fucking necessity is the mother of invention. It's when your like parameters are limited that you have to get really creative within those boundaries. You have to do something genius. No, it's the basic reason, if people don't know, why all these Hollywood movies where they can CGI anything in are fucking shit. But like movies from the 80s where you can see it's just like a guy in a fucking monster costume are like incredibly compelling, because guess what? You're going to have to be an amazing cinematographer to light that guy, to show me the right angles, not show him for too long, but show me in long enough that I see the monster, but not quite. You know, like, you're going to actually have to be a genius to make me believe that that's it. But if you can, think about like Alien, mate, that wouldn't hold up if you tried to like freeze framing and examining it, but it's fucking straight fire, the atmosphere. So here's the problem I have, right, is when you're doing all these things in this scenario, like, why isn't there not a format or a tournament? And I know everyone's going to go, what about Flashpoint? By the way, spoiler, dickheads, I never got to do a single Flashpoint tournament that was the format I came up with or came even close due to coronavirus and other limitations. Like, I never got to do one. I was always hamstrung working on like 4 compromises deep on the original premise. So one thing I would say is this: how has 1TO not thought to make their broadcast the one that's like got massive breathing room for like extra content and like interviews, and then like you can build like storylines around a team for the next day? They're still all doing that thing, Lopus, where because they only care about hours viewed, they just ram the stream full of as many games in a row as possible. And so you go from the most epic game to the very next game. It's like you're just watching it already. Like, that is such a waste of the product. Like, if you could halve the matches, but like double the amount of like focus and make it a super compelling project. And the reason why I can't handle this is, I sort of get it if it's DreamHack Open. Dude, if I'm doing Blast Global Finals or IEM Katowice, it's your fucking flagship event. Make it a spectacle. Make it some next level shit. Even online, you could do that.
Well, I mean, so one of the things that we wanted to do with the original Flashpoint, but we had scheduled, but we couldn't because of coronavirus, was having a bunch of breaks from when the regular season ends to when playoffs start,
yes,
and then again between some of the final games, so that you can actually do content. So yes, you would not only would you not play 2 games on the final day, but you would actually have a break between the semifinals and the finals. You have a couple of days off,
yes,
such that teams could spend more time preparing. You could do more content around it. I tweeted this out last week, but like around this time last week, I actually started wondering if Katowice somehow ended and I just missed it, because it had been like 3 days with no mention of it anywhere. I had seen no content. Nobody's even talking about it, and it just kind of like died a slow death in the background. From that context, it's actually surprising that the previous game before the grand final even got the viewership that they did. And for the record, nobody today is willing to take the chance that having fewer broadcast hours leads to fewer total hours watched at a similar, roughly similar cost base. But I actually do believe that to the extent that someone like ESL, who controls, 70% plus of the calendar, 70% of the total viewed hours, something like that, of large Counter-Strike tournaments, if you're in that position, I do think if you consolidated some of that and made it higher quality, even if it's shorter, you could accomplish 2 things. One, I think you would get higher viewership for the key matches, and 2, I actually think there would be interest in some of the other content that you, by the way, can produce for cheaper, and you can get people to watch that too. It's when you flood everybody's day, and like I wake up, the Katowice game started, California time started at 6 a.m. and then I think 9 a.m. was the second round of games. But it's a best of 3. It's like a 30-minute break, and it's another best of 3. You can't really do anything about that. On the other hand, what if you scheduled it 1 best of 3 a day? You just made it prime time, so basically everybody could watch it. You had like, call it like an hour of content leading up to it, similar to what the NBA does before big games. You did the next semifinal the next day. You gave, in this scenario, you probably would have to, as ESL, you'd probably have to hire somebody to do the content for you, given that nobody's currently doing it in the industry. But I do think you could do a pretty good job of building compelling narratives.
Yes.
By the way, I also do believe that like I would find it much more interesting to watch, for example, the VP Gambit Grand Final, if somebody had kind of laid out a bunch of the stuff behind it for me in an easy to digest format. Like it's not for no reason that ESPN puts out those stories, like before Golden State plays, like they rerun the story of like how Curry practices his shot and like bunch of stuff around it. They rerun some of the stories about like, before the Bucks games of like how Giannis came to the NBA and how he developed over the last couple of years. Like, it's not for no reason. Like, they do that on purpose because you get invested into the game after you read that stuff. And like, nobody is just doing it. Just
imagine
nobody.
basically
they're just like, no, they just like, you're just yelling into the void.
Imagine tying those two concepts together. So maybe I'll go with the extreme. Let's make it like the NFL, where if you win the fucking conference final, obviously it's 2 weeks before the Super Bowl. We're not going that ridiculous, right? But in this case, imagine if after the brackets decided and only the finals left, there was 2 days, and in that 2 days, listen, we're not saying make like a full fucking documentary, but they made a piece that was about like Shiro, like this is who he is. And in it, they also are able to get like Simple to be like, yeah, I've seen him in practices, or some guys like, yeah, actually, you went to watch out for these guys 6 months ago when they were Gambit youngsters. Like, again, the casual fan who only turned up to watch FaZe Clan and Team Liquid and Na'Vi, the big names that he knows, now he might actually watch that and be like, maybe there is something to this. Like, maybe there's a reason to root for this underdog team. Whereas, as I say, like, basically, unless you're a hardcore fan, you just watched that tournament and you were like, oh, that was in the final. Nah, I don't think I'll bother watching. I bet that, I mean, literally, that must have been what happened if you look at the numbers. People just didn't tune in.
You can even do much, like, and just to like take it back a notch, like you can even do much simpler stuff. Like imagine you just pay somebody like 1K to create like a frag movie highlighting Gambit's route to the grand final, and you put that out, like, or like the playoffs leading up to the final days that were played in the final, final weekend. If they're obviously the majority of the fans are going to be in Europe and Eastern Europe, but there's a bunch of fans in North America as well. For example, these games start at 3 a.m. every day, so unless the teams just happen to be in the final match slots of the day, which a lot of the time, like Gambit basically never was, you're just not going to have seen them play whatsoever. It's hard to get invested in that towards the end.
Also, like, I'm trying to think how to phrase this. Put it this way. I've just realised, how have I never made this connection on Twitter before? Because obviously another thing I hate is the notion that, like, isn't it brilliant when a fucking underdog upsets everyone? Whereas I'm like, shut the fuck up. Like, no, I hate that. You know how I want it to be at number 1 and number 2 in the final every time and just, keep that story going. All I'll say is this. The logic, the prevailing consensus among the scene is, it's brilliant. We all love underdogs. Everyone loves an underdog story. Then logically the final should have the highest viewership ever. What that means is, like, 400 of you mentalists fucking like underdogs, you all watched, and then everyone else was like, what, there's nobody in the final? I know, I'm out, I'm just going to go watch fucking Netflix or something. Like,
well, I mean, look,
the numbers don't lie.
Those final 5 minutes of the game where the underdog beat the big name were very exciting, and then all the excitement was gone right after, never to return once the big favorite was knocked out of the tournament.
And in fact, I just went and looked now because I thought, what's a classic example? Well, obviously, when the last major final, when a Vanguard shockingly made the final, which are VP now, but let's be real, they don't have Yakinda, so it was a much different team, right? The problem is because they overperformed to get there. Mate, I've looked it up now. The viewership of that, the peak viewership of that event was like 837,000 for the whole event. Like, I'll see if I can find the final, like what that was. But I'm going to guess there's no way the final had the highest viewership. Let me have a quick look here. Oh, it did actually, but it barely had higher viewership than Na'Vi versus NRG in the quarterfinals. It had like less than 100k more. In the motherfucking major final, when the storyline is Astralis is going for 3 in a row and 4 overall. If that isn't watched, that's because people don't want the team on the other side of the server. Dude, if you have history like that, like, I don't care what the outcome would have been of the Super Bowl. I'll guarantee everyone was going to watch for fucking Tom Brady and fucking Patrick Mahomes. They know that's history in the making. People are here, if anything, were like, it is history in the making, but I don't need to watch it. I'm sure Astralis wins anyway. And by the way, I watched that game. You didn't miss anything. I'm sorry to report. It was garbage.
Well, on the other hand, at least you didn't waste much time because that thing was over in like 35 rounds, if I recall correctly.
Oh, and I'll also say, every other game at that was high viewed was like Na'Vi, NRG, Astralis, Liquid, G2. I noticed the Vanguard's only in there for the final. When they're beating Vitality and Ready, no one gives a shit, man. No one's watching that game. These are hard facts. People don't get it. Because the reason why this matters, right, as well, is we're not like sports, right? Sports can afford, for the historical value, for an underdog to make a crazy run and make it to the final. Like, obviously, that happened with the fucking Heat recently. Like, that never should happen, but that was a great story, right? Because here's the thing. They're mega businesses that, I mean, I know they're having hard times now, but still, they're enormous businesses of scale. Right now in esports, it's half the reason we made Flashpoint. Everyone's hemorrhaging money out of the arse. The last thing we can afford is less viewers on the fucking product. Again, I am not blaming Gambit and VP. I'm not even blaming ESL. Like, it's a circumstance we can't avoid, unfortunately. But it's why, like, business as usual ain't going to work, really.
No, I mean, you have to, and also again, like, there's other ways to solve around it, but you should actively look for those solutions. One other thing that we kind of mentioned as something to talk about before that I kind of want to jump to is the whole Valorant situation, which
sure.
I think obviously, largely a North American thing currently, and some of it is, I think, a function of the fact that currently you can't really play Counter-Strike in North America. You're either one of the top teams and you're effectively living in Europe, which is what Liquid's doing. EG has been, I think, on and off. I think they've returned some of the time, but largely been in Europe, which I think is probably why the part of the reason why Ethan left. And I think you might have been the one who made the point on Twitter, but I think now some of the North Americans are kind of seeing what many of the Europeans have been up against. Obviously, some people do better with the prolonged period away from home than others, but everybody enjoyed making fun of Simple when he didn't exactly enjoy being in the US, having no friends, didn't really speak the language at the time, was kind of just there playing video games all day, and now people have to go to Europe for a couple months and they're complaining on Twitter about the travel, etc. So I suppose two sides. I think we can talk a little bit about the Simple side, which I think is interesting, and then the other piece is just that it's really tough for anybody in the second tier of Counter-Strike to be in North America, which is going to effectively mean that it's unlikely any very interesting or good teams develop in the second tier in America in the coming months, because you just can't really make a living there right now. There's nothing to play. There's no one to practice against. There's no way to improve. Which helps Valorant in the short term, but I actually think will not work out for most of those Counter-Strike players in the long term. And the reason is, a lot of the time when a new FPS game comes out, usually the best players in that tend to be some mixture of old Counter-Strike pros, because that just tends to be where most of the talented FPS players are. And they have a pretty big advantage early on because they played similar games. They kind of, they can kind of apply a lot of what they already know and just kind of get ahead of the game and figure out some things early on. But as we've seen with even CSGO from the beginning, the best players today, by and large, are CSGO players. They're not CS 1.6 players. They're not CS Source players. They're CSGO players. And I think particularly for new games that are just more distance from what existed before than just CSGO from the previous versions, I think it's very unlikely that the best Counter-Strike players who transfer to Valorant are going to be the best Valorant players, or even among the best Valorant players a year from now, much less 2 years from now. So it's a short-term play. I think benefits the people kind of jumping over, and in some ways, I understand trying to make the jump earlier. Well, you still can, but I think that's an interesting situation that I think is developing for North America.